Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to session 4 of the Fundamentals and Practical Leadership for New and Emerging Leaders. Focus of our webinar today is on communication basics. I do want to read the quote because I think it sets the tone for what it is that we're going to be covering today. Developing excellent communication skills is absolutely essential to effective leadership. The leader must be able to share knowledge and ideas to transmit a sense of urgency and enthusiasm to others. If a leader can't get a message across clearly and motivate others to act on it, then having a message doesn't matter at all. So let's begin. We'll remind you of the different technologies that we use, or this webinar technology. So remember that you have your question box that can also act as a comment box that Kathleen, our teammate, is monitoring for us. Your audio, you can always speak by raising your hand. And again, we'll be watching for that. There are interactive polls like we've had in the other sessions that we will be using. We'll be using handouts a little bit more this session, so you may want to open that up. It means the little arrow down, and you'll see 4 different handouts that we'll be using. We'll be referring to those today. And then again, if you want to, please raise your hand as we go forward with our time together today. So clarity, conciseness, and civility. There is so much that we can say about communications. As we all know, there are degrees, diplomas, masters, a whole bunch of stuff that you can do on communication. Here, what we want to do is be as practical as we can for new and emerging leaders in a 1-hour webinar. So we want to talk about clarity, brevity, and civility, and effective communication so that your message is communicated clearly to those that you work with. And then also really thinking about what is your role in terms of advancing a message that your leader is giving you. So one of the important things about communication, we'll talk about it throughout, is you have a whole lot of influence, as we've talked in other webinars, and a responsibility to be able to ensure that the message that you're being asked to communicate continues to be communicated in a way that is consistent with the organization. So here are some key things that we see in terms of great communicators. There's a whole lot more that you can certainly add. This is just a starting point, but we'll be working with it today. So great communicators are authentic. So part of the work of communication is finding and using your voice. Use language and values that are your own. And you know, we know that when people are communicating and it doesn't sound like them, it just doesn't ring true. So feel free to do that as you think about how you're communicating. Am I authentically being myself as I communicate with others? Respect people's time, really important. I'm sure that we can all think about messages that have been communicated to us where you think, this could have been done in 5 minutes and it took 30 and I'm not sure why. And people leave somewhat frustrated by that. So really thinking about people's time, providing rationale and examples where you can, being clear and to the point, and also being careful with jargon. So thinking about your audience and what we can do to make sure that the message is simple. And as we all know, this is especially true with the people that you work with, the participants or clients that you're with. Our language tends to get very jargony, and so in TLA, so 3-letter acronym. So really thinking through those aspects. Paying attention to nonverbal cues, yours and others. So use cues as an opportunity to check in, and we're going to be looking at some examples of that rather than making assumptions based on them. So it isn't so much that you're looking for interpreting what someone's cue is as much as just checking in. And so the check-in might be, I'm sensing that you're distant. I'm just checking in. Is that right? And the person might say, actually, I'm just pensive. I'm just really taken aback by what you're saying. So by checking in, you're able to say, okay, am I reading this right? Or is there another interpretation to what's happening? But use check-in, particularly now that we're virtual. I'm finding it much harder when I'm on camera with others to try to figure out where they're at. And so I check in all the time with people. And in fact, I'll go right through the list and say, I'm just going to check in just to be sure everybody's okay. And it gives people an opportunity to let me know where things are at, as opposed to me assuming it just by the way that they're sitting or the fact that they're not on camera or all those other things that can happen now that we're working in a virtual world. Spend more time listening than talking. It's a hard one for us. And I think as leaders, we tend to think, I need to have the answer. I need to know exactly how to respond. But that aspect of actually, I'm just gonna hear you and get a sense of where you're coming from so that I can be informed by that and tailor what I'm going to be saying based on what you're telling me. Communicate often. We all know that how important that is. We'll talk about it more today. The different ways in which we might communicate a message so that people receive it. Tailor your approach. So you're thinking about your audience, your message, your situation as we move forward. And you'll see that at the end of our webinar today, we're going to have a template that tries to pull it all together, all these different aspects. Make sure that you follow up where you need to. Sometimes I'll be working with leaders and I'll tell them that it's going to be really important as you deliver this message for you to deliver it, in the morning and then have an open door where people can come and see you in the afternoon so that people know that you're available for follow-up. Or you might think about teammates that you might think, I know this person will have a hard time with this message, so I'm going to clear my schedule just so that I have time to check in with them and see how they're doing. So really be mindful about how you're going to follow up after you deliver a message. And our models of civility. So this is one of the things that we see sometimes deteriorating in teams, is that we get so used to working with one another that we think that we can just kind of be really uncivil with one another. And so that aspect of civility is really significant, and Carrie will be touching on that as we go through today. So I forgot to mention that Carrie and Kathleen are back working on this webinar as well. Okay, so 2 good examples from the current pandemic. We thought about this quite a bit in terms of what we wanted to present, and we thought we'd go with these 2 and then get back to it. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to go to your second handout, which is great communication. It looks just like this so that you have it. If you can split your screen so you have that as you watch the 2 examples, that's great. If you can't, I'll come back and refer to it. So I'm going to now just show a video. Now, if you are not using your computer audio, you may not be able to hear, so just bear with us for the 2 minutes of the video. If you're not hearing it, try to increase the volume of either your browser or your computer. We've had one person that's had an issue in the past with a video, so I just wanted to share that to see. So here we go. Hopefully you can see it, always an issue as we put videos up, but hopefully you can hear it. So 2 examples. Think about those elements of great communicators as you hear.
Is there any way the province can somehow restrict or prevent gatherings?
I've always said, Mark, we just don't have enough bylaw officers or police officers, and we've always relied on the public, and they've done an incredible job. You just can't police 14.5 million people. But as Dr. Williams said, I think it was a few days back, as he went to go see his grandchildren, practice social distancing, and that's the most important thing right now. We're moving forward in a really good way right now, and we just want to keep the numbers going down, and all the credit goes to the people of Ontario. If they didn't follow the protocols from the Chief Medical Officer, we wouldn't be in the position that we're in right now. So let's just, as I always say, use common sense, focus on social distancing, and I know it's tough. I'll tell you, it's tough right now. Not seeing loved ones, not being able to hug them, but just practice on social distancing.
And from a health perspective, this week testing will continue, including giving ongoing public confidence that we are reaching isolated, rural, Māori and Pacific communities. Contact tracing will be bolstered even further, and we'll continue to use the best evidence, advice and modelling we have to make daily decisions to serve New Zealanders. The most important thing to remember in the meantime, though, is that all of this preparation takes us to an alert level in 1 week's time, a recovery room of sorts, that has many restrictions. Yes, alert level 3 allows more economic activity like construction, manufacturing and forestry, but it does not allow more social activity, and for good reason. If we want to make sure that we are a health success story and ensure our economy can start to operate again without the virus taking off, We need to get this next phase right.
Okay, so give me a moment while I put my screen back on. Hopefully you're able to see it. And I'm just going to check in. Kathleen, are you good? Carrie, you see okay?
Yep, I can see.
Great, thank you. Okay, so two really different examples, and it's sometimes easy to select real polar opposites to make an example, right? So to be able to say, well, let's choose maybe Trudeau and Trump, and wow, you can really see the difference. But in fact, communicators really need to look at the subtleties of good communicators and such drastic differences in the personalities and even politics of Doug Ford and Jacinda Ardern, and yet they're both, we believe, really good communicators. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask you to go to your polls page. So if you remember, on your handout, you'll see one that says link to polls. And on there, you will then see this. And again, you click on the link to get there. And here's what we're going to do. So the first one is going to be, which of these did Doug Ford get right? And I'll ask you to, it's a picture, so you just actually have to click your mouse on the ones that you think he got right, and you'll see the icons there. Good job. So click on all the ones that you think he did right. So we see lots of you talking about, his communication is authentic. And I know for some of us, it's kind of been a real refreshing thing to see Doug Ford come in the way that he has on this work around the pandemic. And it has helped us to really get behind him. And I think it comes down to that authenticity piece. We saw him, he really has built trust with us because he's honest. And that message that he said at one point, he said, we give the credit to the people of Ontario. And that was just a quick moment to help us understand that we fit into the picture, that we are a part of the solution. So it's a really good example of authenticity, of respecting people's time, because he was clear, and you have this ability to know, if I want to hear, I know that it's at this time every day he comes on. He is able to actually turn to experts when he needs to. So all of those aspects, tailoring the approach, yeah, absolutely, understanding the audience that he's speaking to, avoiding jargon. So he's done a really good job looking at those things. And I want us to really look at the different people where communication is happening regularly and think about, what can I learn as I think about myself as a leader, as I watch leaders communicate through the pandemic, because communication at this point is so critical. And so Doug Ford, a good example for us. And now just to provide a different style and a different personality, we thought that it might be interesting to watch Jacinda Ardern. And of course, some of us, and again, I'll ask the same question here, what did you see her do that you thought was very, very valuable? And of course, many of us probably have seen her where she's on Facebook and she's wearing her sweatshirt and she's talking right to us, and that is, of course, such a great example. But we wanted to provide one where she is at the podium as well, because that gives you a good comparison, again, of really different styles in terms of people, personalities, politics, and yet they're both doing a really good job with their communication strategy. So we see here what you see: communicating often tailoring the message, civility, absolutely, both of them just staying to the point, being frustrated at times through this journey, but staying to the point. For Jacinda, I really noticed also her passion. Like, she is just passionate, and she had a hard message to deliver. If you noticed, her message was, we're going to open more, but this does not mean that we're going to be increasing social activity. Really clear moment in her communication where she says, most important. So think about that. Think about when you need to use words like that. Most important. Don't use them all the time or they'll lose their effectiveness. But if you use them at the right moment, your team or the different audiences will know to sit up and listen, particularly if you've created credibility, authenticity, if you are really spending time listening, tailoring your approach, all of those aspects. So thank you for your feedback on that. I'll ask you now, actually, hopefully you're on screen, to come back to GoToMeeting, because you should be able to then just see what your colleagues are seeing so much that we can't see the words anymore. But yes, the both examples of how well they have communicated. So I am going to get out of the survey here and turn it over to Carrie to talk further about authenticity. To you, Carrie.
Thanks very much, Maria. So yes, we wanted to start in that area of authenticity, and this quote that talks about authenticity requiring vulnerability, transparency, and integrity. So we're going to break that down a little bit, things that you can think about as you are looking to move forward and communicate in a very authentic way. So under the vulnerability, and I'm not sure if this slide's moved because I can't, it doesn't look like it's moved on my screen. So if it hasn't, if you could move it to that, that particular slide, thank you. So, you know, we spent a lot of time in the first couple of sessions talking about your why, talking about the legacy that you want to leave as a leader, and those things, hopefully that work and that thought process that you've done really gives you a foundation and a touch point as to what your voice should feel like, what your voice should come across as, how you want to be as a leader. And in particular, you know, if you have a challenging message to send, if you have something that you're not entirely confident in how you're going to craft it, how you're going to speak to it, hopefully you can look back to those things and say, you know, what is it that I want to be seen as? What is it that I want to leave behind? That can help me think about how I want to talk about something and be very, very authentic in my own voice. And we also spoke back in the very first COVID webinar about deliberate calm and bounded optimism. So that's the one thing to think about related to your voice. You want to be very authentic, but you also, you know, if you yourself are in a state that you aren't feeling terribly calm about a message, how can you get yourself thinking about it differently, get to that place of deliberate calm? Again, you don't want to lie to people about the situation, but you also don't want to be negative, even if you might be feeling negative in the moment. So spend some time with yourself, checking in how you're feeling. How do you want your message to come across? How do you want people to feel after they've read your message? And again, using your own words and your own voice. Transparency, again, we talked about a little bit of this in COVID. You want to be very real about what the certainties are or what the uncertainties are. And again, we saw that in those videos, you know, that very real. Most importantly, we will be moving forward, but you know, the certainty is that you will not be able to move into a place that doesn't have social distancing, the message from Jacinda. And also, here's what we don't know yet. So just very transparent, what we know, what we don't know. And then integrity. You know, you want to state what it is that you want from people, what you're asking of people. You want to follow up on it. You want to state your expectations and your accountabilities. And that's both for yourself and for others. So here's what I'm going to be doing, and be very accountable about doing that. And here's what I'm asking of you, and hold people to those expectations and accountabilities. So we want to move next into respecting people's time. And there's lots of different ways to respect people's time. Sometimes it's about giving enough time for something, and sometimes it's about being very clear in your message so that you're not overusing the time you have available. So the very first point there, I need 15 minutes of your time is now okay. So you're checking in with them, is this an okay time to chat? But don't ask for 15 minutes if you know the conversation is going to take a half an hour.
Carrie?
So really think about, yes?
Sorry, I think there might be some cutting in and out. I'm wondering if you turn your camera off, if that might help. Let's try.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Maria. So yes, you want to be very clear about how much time you're asking for, how much time you think you're going to need. And if you ask for 15 minutes because you think it's a 15-minute conversation, and then the conversation carries on, pause at that 15-minute point and say, I asked you for 15 minutes. It looks like this is going to take longer. Do you have time now to carry on, or should we rebook another time? So just being very respectful in that perspective. Also, when you go into a meeting, you have a certain number of tasks, you have an agenda, you have time allotted. If, as you start moving through the meeting, you realize you can't meet your agenda, pause in that moment and have a conversation about what can be deferred, what's most important to get through the meeting, if you don't think that you can get through everything. So everybody has the opportunity to say, you know, the last thing on the agenda is really important. So let's move it off and knock something else off of the agenda, as opposed to just getting to the point where you've ended the meeting and not been thoughtful about if you needed more time, what you're going to get rid of. Stop offside conversations, take it outside of the meeting. It's another way to ensure you're respecting people's time when you're in a meeting scenario. Consider what things need their own email and where you can group things into one. So sometimes it's a bit of a toss-up between, you know, I have 5 things to talk about and I don't want to send 5 emails. So you put them all together into an email and then you end up with a novel that people can't get through the whole thing and figure out what the point of it is. And be aware of your hot buttons. Be aware when you're in conversations, when you're in meetings, when you're writing emails, where you might have a tendency to get on a little bit of a soapbox and go a bit further in your explanation than you perhaps need to, because it's a very passionate topic for you, and spend a moment thinking about that. And I'll check in, Maria, is that better?
I'm hearing it is, yes, thank you.
Thanks very much. So we're going to, you know, we looked at some verbal communication in front of groups earlier in the session. We're going to have a quick moment and look at emails and how you can bring your authenticity and also respect people's time, those 2 factors, when you're looking at an email. So we have a sample email for you on handout number 3. And also on the screen, we're going to be opening the polls again. So if you open the handout, you can see it when we do the poll. So I'm just going to read the email out to you that a team lead might have sent out to somebody. The subject of it is new policy. And the email is, I have resolved the issue that you brought up at the last team meeting regarding inconsistency of referral form completion. Everyone on the team should let me know if you get an uncompleted referral form. There's a new policy regarding slip and fall safety. They have decided this is necessary and everyone needs to read and sign it. Also, please mark your calendars for an organization-wide meeting that has been scheduled for November 13th. Please read the slip and fall policy and follow it, effective immediately. It's attached here, and you need to sign a confirmation that you reviewed it and put it in my mail slot. So we're going to pop over to the polls and have a bit of a conversation about what you might like to see differently in that email. So I'll just give it a moment here. So if you can type in your responses as to what do you think could have been done better in this email in terms of respecting people's time, in terms of being authentic, or anything else that you see there that you really struggle with. So it jumps around and it doesn't go into appropriate detail. Suggestion that maybe we should have multiple emails for these messages. Need to be consistent in the messaging. The slip and fall policy, it talks about it and then it talks about something else and then goes back again. Saying hello, that again, your voice is one that might be, you know, hey, good morning, whatever the case may be. A greeting, yeah, same, similar vein. I think I saw there, yeah, didn't say thank you. It's fairly impersonal. Too many topics, I think. Yeah, subject should be specific, so that's a good one as well. I think we have people sort of voting on some of the things that have already been said, which is great. And there's some detail required there that's lacking. Doesn't allow for chain of communication on one subject. So somebody could reply all and mention one piece of it, and then the pieces might get jumbled up. Needs a bit more kindness, a bit more personality. Yeah. Thank you very much. So we'll move away from the poll and look at that email again alongside an alternative email. And this alternative email, I think, is fairly consistently in my voice. So this is what I would have sent for this email. So again, I think you caught everything that was in there that I would have spoken to, you know, in the subject, being a bit more specific, that you require some action on something and that there are some follow-up items. I too sort of looked at, do we put all of these subjects together in the email or not? For the sake of the webinar, I organized it so that you could potentially put all of the subjects in instead of breaking it up into 3, but that is certainly also a valid alternative. So added the greeting, the good morning. The one piece for me that's a struggle in the original email is where it just sort of said there's a new policy and they have decided it. So instead of that, giving a bit of an explanation. There have been a number of slips and falls in the past couple of months. In review of the contributing factors, the Health and Safety Committee has created a new policy. And then that bold, italic, you know, action. If you're skimming through this email, hopefully you're stopping on the action. Oh, I need to review the policy and sign the confirmation. And there's a date and a deadline by when I need to do it. That gives you, as the email sender, the opportunity to know, okay, after July 15th, I'm going to need to look and see if there's anybody who hasn't done it yet. And then again, I would agree that there's potentially a good approach is to split those subjects up, but if you're keeping them together, I then went into sort of a separate subject, follow-up items, and again, give a little bit more information about the form completion, what exactly I have done about it since we talked about doing it, what the follow-up is going to continue to look like, and that I'd like you to continue contacting me. And then I added the organization-wide meeting, recognizing that people might not get to it, but that's a place where I'm likely going to, and the organization is likely going to communicate more than once about this particular item. So if people don't get to the last item, I know I'll have other opportunities to talk to them about it. And again, adding that, that thanks at the bottom in your own voice, in your own personality. So I think that that touched on pretty much everything that you folks found that wasn't ideal in that email, and hopefully that gives you a bit of an example of some of the things you can do differently in an email. So we're going to move now to nonverbal cues, and Maria talked a little bit about this in the opening. So absolutely paying attention to nonverbal cues gives you the opportunity to check in, paying attention to your own nonverbal cues. What are you doing that might be showing your a particular emotion, that might be showing whether or not you're engaged, making sure that you're setting yourself in a way that is giving the message that you think you want to give. But really that, notice it as a means to check in as opposed to assuming you know what it means. And for those of us who took introductory communication classes 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, a lot of them actually were about telling us what different things mean. So they would say, when you see somebody with their arms crossed, it means that they're being defensive, that they're not accepting your message. We sort of used to get a list of all of these different nonverbal cues and how to interpret them. And certainly that's not the way that we approach nonverbal cues anymore. You want to know what that nonverbal cue means to that person. Somebody, as a bit of a silly example, somebody may just have their arms crossed because they're cold. That's how they normally sit. There are certainly cultural differences in many nonverbal cues. So it really is the opportunity to notice it, pay attention to it, and pause and check in and ask the question so that you're really having a deep and meaningful exchange of information as opposed to making any assumptions at all. And I will at this time turn it back over to Maria. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carrie. I think there was a message that said if it's helpful sometimes in terms of seeing the screen. There's a little bar that goes across. If you move it up or over, you should be able to see most of the screen. But if that's not the case, let me know, and certainly I can go off camera as well. So listen to understand, another element of great communicators. And I think this is probably one of the hardest things for us to do. And part of that is because it takes time, and because we are running around with to-do lists and a whole lot of other aspects to who we are, that it becomes really difficult to listen. I can think probably of examples, and I'm sure you have them, where someone faces you and you feel completely heard just by their presence and their ability to be with you. And this is a critical component of a good communicator, is to be able to really listen to what someone has to say. So it's important for us not to listen to build your response. So in many ways, I think about it as emptying yourself, being present to what the other is saying. So what tends to happen to us is the person is speaking, and as they're speaking, you're already thinking, this is how I'm going to respond. This is what I'm going to say to either help them move that forward or to make my point. But if you're able to just say, okay, I'm going to actually just be very present to that individual and hear what they have to say, it goes a long way for that person to feel really respected and heard. So you ask questions to confirm that you understand. So it isn't questions about learning more details or going down a path of a tangent, but being able to say, here's what I'm hearing, is that right? I'm checking in with you. So this is what I hear you saying, or help me understand, did I get that right? And the same back. So sometimes the listening is also checking in with whether that person is actually listening to you. And sometimes that happens as you are watching that person's body language and you're thinking, I'm not sure you're hearing anything that I'm saying. I'm not sure you're taking it seriously. I'm not seeing you take any notes, so I'm not sure how you're actually going to remember everything I'm saying. So sometimes it's you asking questions to see if they are understanding what you're saying. And that might look like, so can you just repeat for me what we just talked about? And I know that sounds a bit, it may sound like, well, that's, you're not trusting me, but it's just to be sure. It's just to be sure that we're both on the same page as we leave our meeting. Or summarizing. So can you summarize where we're at? And then being able to do that. Obviously, being able to have an action plan out of meetings or out of sessions also helps. Rephrase and repeat. So it's the art of really being able to mirror and hear. And again, I think we do this really well with the people that we work with, so clients or participants, but it's harder when we're doing it within teams. So I can actually sometimes see amazing things happen with, let's say, social workers who are so good at being so present with their clients, but then with one another, it's a really different experience. And it happens to all of us. I can think of, we do a lot of facilitated conversation mediation work, and my kids laugh at me. They can't believe I'm involved in that work because that's not necessarily how I come across to them. And that happens sometimes within our coworkers. We tend to have the energy and the presence for the people that we're working with as in terms of our clients and participants, but not necessarily the same with the people, the coworkers that we have. Respond to what they have said, and rather than just repeating your previous points is always really, really important. And again, I'm going to share that sometimes when you're not hearing each other, the best thing to do to go fast is to actually slow down the conversation. And so to get into the space of saying, okay, I don't think I'm not getting what they're saying and they're not getting what I'm saying, and we're just kind of going back and forth, that's a moment for you to say, okay, I'm going to actually just pause and focus on just repeating and paraphrasing what they said to make sure that I got it. And that in itself just brings a different energy to the conversation. So listen to understand, really an important element of great communicators. So we move to this idea of communication, and we hear often people have to hear the message a lot to hear it. And so it's communicate often, and it is about communicating often, but it's also understanding how to communicate within a world where we are bombarded with messaging, with information. It's so hard. It's so hard to get your crystal clear message across thousands of emails or tweets or even in meetings. It's difficult. So we have to really be mindful in thinking about those things. As Carrie mentioned, how you even outline an email, and of course you all picked up on it. So we do want to talk a little bit about that and when it is that you have to be really attentive to communicating often. So some really key things about refining and repeating. So research shows that people need to be exposed to a message 7 times to take it in. When we're working on something, it's so clear to us, and it's so much harder to be thinking that people don't understand it. But that might be the first time that they're hearing it and you're living it. Microsoft actually did a study that says if you're just sharing it verbally, it actually takes 6 to 20 times. So sometimes I'm shocked that we've been talking about something for months and people come and say, oh, that's the first time I heard that. And you think, oh my gosh, we've sent like 10 emails on this. How do you not know? We've talked about it at the staff session. How do you not know? But we need to just be mindful that people have a lot going on, and their ability to receive messages, given the context of where we are at, sometimes is really, really difficult. Going in and out, I see. Sorry, just checking in. Am I going in and out, or am I okay? So I'm going to actually go off camera too, just to see if that helps. Your single overriding communication objective, really important. So really be thinking about what are my 3 key compelling points to my why. Again, think about Jacinda Ardern. She was so good. This is most important, and she gave the rationale behind it, the compelling reason why. Here's why we have to, stay true to the line. So really being mindful of your compelling why to the rationale. The piece that Carrie added to the front of her message really helped her from that perspective as well. And then, the question is, how do we determine when you're going to be communicating 7 times or more? On what kinds of things? So please don't think that this has to be for absolutely everything. It just doesn't. It is about thinking about those areas. And I'm going to articulate 4 of those that we think are really important. The first one is relational. It's relational. And we forget about this one when you think about communication. We tend to think of the others. But for this, it's about key messages to your teammates and to your team. You belong. So communicating that as often as you can in as many different ways as you can. So glad you're here. You really brought more information to us. That's amazing. You belong to the team. How are you communicating that often? How important their work is. And then the fact that their work matters. So think about it. This is one that we miss often. The relational piece is one that you need to be communicating often and regularly. And the message is the compelling pieces is you belong, your work is, you are important, and your work matters. So 3 key things there around relational things about how you communicate. Second, around strategy. So important for you to understand your organization's strategy and then understand how it is that what your role is in an ongoing basis communicating that strategy. The third is about significant change, getting into the habit. Have that, if you're going through a significant change in your organization, have it as a standing item. Even if all you're communicating is there's really no more new information, or this is something interesting that I found out about this. But the significant change, whatever it is, have it as an ongoing item is a helpful way to continue to refine and repeat and communicate often. And then issues of safety and risk are also ones that you may have to constantly communicate and follow up on. Carrie gave some good examples in the last webinar about what you do and leadership roles that you need to play around that safety and risk piece. So relational, strategy, significant change, and issues of safety and risk. What we're going to do is we're going to go back to the polls at this time. And so back to you, polls everywhere if you can. And the question is, communicating often, refine and repeat, what have we learned from the pandemic about communication? So as you think about communication, from the main leaders as we just saw, but also communication in your organization. What are you learning? So I'll give you a moment. So empathic, transparent communication is best. Important to be clear and concise. People need ongoing communication, transparency. People are on the edge, try to get the overall idea of what's being said. They're going fast, aren't they? Stress is affecting everyone. Keep it simple, friendly, authentic. I'm gonna have to slow this one down next time. People need reassurance. Very important, communicating often. Action should match words with integrity. Key messages for all leaders who are all delivering the same reassuring message. That's a great way. We're going to segue into that in a moment. Understand that everyone, keep everything clear and consistent. Sorry, they're coming fast. Transparency and empathy is key. Again, yeah, going back to even Doug Ford. The importance of responding within an appropriate time frame. So we've touched on so many of those points of great communicators as you think about it. Yeah, that there's no playbook. Yeah. Say you don't know if that's the case. People appreciate it. Absolutely. Keep it simple and repeat often. Keep everyone up to date. Clear, concise, and easy to read. Clear. Yeah. So think about that. Think about, okay, so how am I as a leader contributing to what people need and what you're learning? How am I doing that as I think about my responsibility to my team or my project, my colleagues, as we go forward? Please be kind. Thank you. All right, so we are going to, humor can be useful, no kidding. Yes, especially if it's within your personality to be so. So we want to, let me just think. Think about tailoring the approach and the follow-up. So lots of what you said, I think, touches on a lot of these points as well. So meet people where they are at. And then just be mindful that in your team, that might be different. So even if we think of you're communicating a change or how people deal with uncertainty, which is what we're facing right now, for some of us, we thrive in that, and that it's going to be okay. For others, we're very cautious. For others, we just want it to go back to the way it was. So even as you think about your team, you need to be thinking about, are there people that I need to be checking in more often? Does one way work for some and not the others? So meet people where they are at. Think of them a formality in terms of the different approaches, the different audiences. So how formal do you have to be with your messaging? Do I have to have a meeting for it? What's the topic, and therefore what do I need to be thinking about in terms of how we're meeting? When it's about a behavior change, and sometimes that is what you're asking in terms of health and safety, or perhaps a new way in which we're going to be running meetings or elements of accountability. The question is, how do you reinforce and support? And so part of communicating isn't just about, here's what the new policy is, and now you have to go live it out. It's also about, so that's going to be really different for our team. How are we going to go about providing that support that we need? Make it a dialogue where it's appropriate. And I'll go back to the points that we've reiterated in the past, because we see fumbles happen here where people receive the invitation to dialogue thinking that they're part of decisions. And so be very clear when you're in dialogue. Are you providing an update? Are you asking for feedback? Are you evaluating something? Or are you making a decision? So those 4 keywords I find often help. So it's, am I evaluating something? Am I asking for their input? Am I providing an update? Or are we making a decision together when it's a dialogue? Where there's a task, how will you follow up to be sure it gets done? And having, clear action plans out of meetings, for example. And making a plan can help think through the options and ensure you aren't missing anyone. And so that's where we want to spend a little bit of time, is kind of pulling it all together with respect to communication planning. So some of you might be familiar with, there's many templates out there, but what we find, there's a template that I'm going to share with you that I have found really helpful as I prepare communication plans on a variety of topics. So that they could be from systems, conversations that we're having, to within an organization where there's massive change coming, whatever it might be, or even just to a team. So you might be thinking, I don't know when I'd use it because I don't need to develop a communication plan, but it's important for you as a leader to understand how a communication plan comes together, to offer your support in developing a communication plan, to understanding where you fit into that communication plan, and to using it even as a discipline to help you to figure out what it is and how you need to communicate. So remember, we're not going to do this for absolutely everything. Remember the 4 areas that we talked about of where communicating often and being really sensitive to how you're communicating might be helpful. So in this template, what you'll see, there's, right at the top, there's a purpose and the date. You have to actually know things like who owns the communication plan. So is it the board, the executive director? Do I own it because it's for the work that I've been mandated to do? Spokesperson, so really important. Do you have permission to speak to whom or who does? This is where people, we know we can fall into some messes if it's not clear who has the authority from the organization to speak. And it can be something as internal as it can be external. So if it's external, do I have the authority to speak on behalf of my organization? And if I don't, do I know who I'm going to point that to? And if it's internal, then it's the same question. Asking your supervisor, at what point or can I speak about the pieces that I'm going to be speaking about, if I can. I wrote some really basic communication style elements, but you could add to those as we go forward. So credibility and consistency, critical, right? Cornerstone of all communication. Communication is going to be open, direct, honest, clear, timely, and sensitive. And we're going to have designated person. So again, this is for bigger pieces, helpful, I think, for you to know how they come together, how you might use them, and how you fit into it. Really valuable to spend some time thinking about what are our key messages. So refer back to the webinar slides. We just talked about the importance of thinking about all of those elements that we've shared. And really, how can I be concise, clear, transparent? How can I think about what the questions are going to be so that I can anticipate and put those within my communication? And those key messages are ones that you just go back to over and over again so that people have an understanding. And sometimes, as we know, with the pandemic, for example, it's going to be evolving. And so you talk about that, it's evolving. But when there's a big element, these are aspects that you can do. You then also identify your audiences. So again, for you, it might be, okay, we're going to be rolling out a new program. And so I want to be thinking about communicating. I want to be talking to any other teams about this change. I want to perhaps be talking to IT. I want to be talking to and thinking about how I'm going to communicate this change to clients, to family members, to the community partners that you might have, if it's significant enough, to the media. So you would list all the different stakeholders that are a part of that, so you have real clarity on who it is that you're communicating to. I've just given you some examples here for you to consider. This is actually a really helpful exercise because we tend to think, oh, well, I just have to tell my staff or my team about it. But as you think about stakeholders, it helps you to realize, you know what, there might be other people that I really need to communicate this to so that they understand and feel equipped to deal with the change, and so that things aren't a surprise, both internal and external. So the critical path looks something like this. So you would talk about who the audience is, and I've just given you examples here. So who's your audience? What are the issues? So from their perspective, from the perspective of that audience, what's the issue? What are the objectives of what you're going to try to communicate? How? So what are the tools and tactics? The timing of it? Who's the responsible spokesperson? And how are you going to know that it was successful? So to give you an example here, the board of directors, what we want them to do is stay informed with key messages. We want the objective is receive key messages ahead of the formal rollout. No board member wants to be surprised. And it's going to be perhaps an email that they received a communication plan, and that's going to happen with the CEO. And the success factor is board members feel equipped to answer questions. So I've given you, I won't go through them all, but examples of community influencers, leadership, and staff, and what we want to be able to communicate from that perspective. And down to the time, for example, when the communication is going to happen. So things like thinking about staff issues might be, why is this happening? Always for staff, it comes down to, is my job going to change? Will I lose my job? Will I have to do more? Who will be the leader? In big changes, but even in program changes, they might be thinking all of this. So thinking from the perspective of what are their issues and how am I going to communicate to be ahead, to be able to say there will be no job loss, your job will remain the same, or whatever it is going to be, so that they can, a big part of communication is allaying fear, building trust, helping understand next steps and actions. Okay, so we thought that having you have a template that provides some perspective on how you would develop a communication plan, whether it's for something small or big, or how you fit into one would be helpful. And then even we've included here the media, whether it's proactive or reactive, and then answering, what are the issues that they're going to see, and really focusing on benefits, and then thinking about who shares it and how it goes forward. So that is, we hope, a way to tie all of these elements together into a template that hopefully will be helpful to you. And I know many of you use something similar already. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Carrie for the final pieces of the webinar.
Thanks very much, Maria. So we're going to move into our last heading under how we define great communicators, and that is to look at the idea of civility. And I'll start with a quote from Gandhi, actually, that civility does not mean the mere outward gentleness of speech cultivated for the occasion, but an inborn gentleness and desire to do the opponent good. Our next session in September, we're going to be talking about conflict management and certainly setting up your organization to be able to successfully navigate conflict. Having that foundation of a civil and respectful culture is just critically important. So some tips around civility in an organization, and of course the first one is to yourself be a model of civility. And again, that is about, you are going to have moments where hot buttons are pressed, where you're feeling particularly emotional or passionate about something, you're frustrated, and taking that moment, taking that breath before you communicate, however it is you're communicating, to review and say, is my message, not just the content, but the tone of my message appropriate? Assuming the best of people, so that goes back to, again, asking questions as opposed to assuming why somebody has done something. So this is what happened, can you help me understand? Relying on facts goes along with that rather than assumptions. And really, you need to consistently challenge incivility, and you need to do that in a civil way, which can be challenging. One of the things we'll be talking about in conflict resolution are some of the different ways that people approach conflict that can be really difficult to navigate. And one of those is often sort of a passive-aggressive approach, and sometimes that's where incivility comes from, that people are approaching something very passive-aggressively, and you need to be able to call that out. You need to talk to people about it, and consistently challenge it at any time you see it, in order to, again, set expectations of what you want from people and hold people accountable to it. One of the things that you can do if you find that an exchange is becoming uncivil is moving to a different media. A really good example of that is always emails. Sometimes emails, you don't get tone across that you find yourself in the middle of a negative email spiral, I call them, pick up the phone. Don't hit reply one more time, pick up the phone and call and have the conversation. Think about when you use I rather than you. So again, not you are this, you have done this, but I have experienced this, I have seen this behavior. Also think about when to use we. So bringing everybody into a conversation, you know, we act civilly in this organization. We are always very respectful of each other. And going back to that email example that I had, it's very rare that using they is a way to promote civility. They suggest people are other and puts people outside of your loop of civility. There are certainly times when you would use it, but always think if you're going to use the word they told me that you were doing this. Why is the word they appropriate? Because you want to use it very sparingly. Step away to calm down. I've touched on that already. And remembering that assertiveness is not incivility. How you are assertive is what's really important. So empathetic assertion, recognizing the other person's situation. So going back to some of Maria's conversation about listening, about really understanding where somebody's coming from, and then expressing your own needs. You're empathetic to where they're at, you're asserting what you need from them. Escalating assertion is also certainly something you can do. It's not a continuum from assertion to aggression. Assertion is its own continuum. So you can become increasingly firm in how you're stating what it is that you expect from somebody, what your concerns are about something without moving into that aggressive place. And of course, these are things that it's ideal if you take some opportunities to practice them. There's a resource at the bottom of this slide that has some more tips about that. I'd encourage you to take a look at. And we're just going to quickly move on and take a look at the reflection questions for this particular webinar. So again, we have reflection questions for those who are looking towards earning a certificate, and they are due by the next webinar. The questions are here and also in the email that went out to you. You'll get detailed instructions on filling these out, but maximum 3 pages. We want you to think about that great communicator checklist and where you excel and where you'd like to work differently. You want to think about what you've done in the communications around the pandemic that has supported great communication in your organization. And we'd like you to take a shot at that communication template that Maria provided. Think about a current or upcoming message that you need to be sharing or responsible for, and just try to fill that out and think about those different components of that and how that would help you move forward in being able to make that communication. So again, our next webinar, September 28th. Hope you all have a fantastic summer as we take a pause for July and August. And if you're doing the certificate, your reflections are due at the time of the next webinar. And we will finish as usual with Wordle, so that you can just check out, tell us a little bit about how you're feeling at the end of this session. So if you can go back to your link to polls, that's your opportunity to fill out the Wordle. One word, or if you're doing more than one word, I believe it's a comma between words. And thank you very much for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you again in September.